2 days after my daughter's wedding, my son-in-law arrived at my doorstep with a notary and 2 strangers. His smug words chilled me to the bone. "Margaret, it's time you moved into a retirement home. This house is ours now." I stared at him, a 65-year-old widow who had built her entire life within these walls, and smiled. "That's wonderful," I replied calmly. "But before we sign anything, let's stop by the police station. They're very interested in the documents I sent them about you." Those words changed everything. Before I continue, please make sure to subscribe to the channel and write in the comments what time it is where you are right now. Your support helps us share more stories like this one. My name is Margaret Weaver, I'm 65 years old, and I've lived in the same brick house for over 40 years. This house isn't just walls and a roof. It's where I raised my daughter, Claire. It's where my husband, Robert, and I built our lives together. It's where I said my last goodbye to him before the cancer took him away. And now, my new son-in-law was trying to steal it. It didn't begin with the notary. No, the storm had been building long before that. I remember the first time Claire introduced me to David, the man who would later try to strip me of my home. He was tall, good-looking, confident, the kind of man who shook your hand with a little too much pressure, as if he wanted to prove something. His smile never quite reached his eyes, but Claire was glowing beside him. "Mom, this is David," she said that night, her cheeks flushed with happiness. He leaned down, kissed her temple, and added, "The luckiest man alive." I wanted to be happy for her. After all, she'd gone through a painful divorce just a few years earlier. She was lonely, struggling to keep her teaching job and raise her spirits. David seemed like a second chance at happiness. But even then I felt it. The way his eyes flickered around my living room, not at the photos or memories, but at the furniture, the space, the details. Like a man surveying property rather than visiting a home. I brushed it off. Maybe I was being paranoid. The wedding came fast. Too fast, if I'm honest. Within 6 months of dating, David had proposed with a sparkling 2-carat diamond ring. I remember holding Claire's hand, admiring the jewel. "It must have cost a fortune," I murmured. She giggled like a schoolgirl. "David says he saved for it." But something about that didn't sit right. I'd seen Claire struggle to pay her car insurance, and David never seemed to have a clear job. He called himself a consultant, but whenever I asked what kind, his answers were vague. "I help small businesses," he'd say with a shrug before changing the subject. Still, love can make people blind. And Claire wanted to believe she'd finally found someone who would protect her, love her, and give her stability. The wedding was beautiful. I paid for most of it, dipping into the savings Robert and I had set aside for emergencies. A $20,000 check for the reception hall, the flowers, the catering. I did it because I wanted my daughter to have her dream day. And for a moment, as I watched her walk down the aisle, radiant in white, I thought maybe I'd been wrong about David. Maybe he really did love her. But 2 nights later, sitting in the Golden Maple restaurant, David revealed who he really was. The candlelight flickered between us. Claire was still glowing from the honeymoon, her hand resting delicately on David's. And then he leaned forward, his voice casual but calculated. "Margaret, have you thought about what you're going to do with the house?" I froze, my fork halfway to my mouth. "What do you mean?" "Well," he said smoothly, "Claire and I need our own place to start our family. And this house, it's just too big for you alone, don't you think? At your age, wouldn't you be more comfortable in a retirement community?" Claire's smile faltered. "David," she whispered. I set my fork down, the taste of wedding cake turning bitter on my tongue. "David, that's my home. I built my life there. I raised Claire there. Robert and I worked for it." He leaned back, unbothered. Of course. I just think it would be practical. Think about it. Your grandchildren playing in those rooms, Claire finally having the stability she deserves. And you'd be well taken care of in a smaller place." The way he said smaller place felt like an insult. Like he was already packing me up in boxes, shipping me off to some sterile nursing facility. I glanced at Claire, but she looked torn, her eyes darting between us. David, I said firmly, you and Claire are welcome to stay with me for a little while. But the house is mine. I'm not going anywhere. His smile faltered just for a second. Behind his eyes, I saw something colder. But then he plastered the charm back on. Of course, Margaret. Just a thought. But it wasn't just a thought. 2 days later, he showed up with a notary at my door. I'll never forget the way he stood there, his hand resting possessively on Claire's shoulder, his voice loud and confident. Margaret, we've sorted everything. It's all ready. You just need to sign, and the house will belong to us. We'll move you into a retirement home where you'll be comfortable. I stared at him for a long moment, then smiled faintly. That's wonderful, David. But before I sign anything, let's stop by the police station. They're very interested in the documents I've already sent them about you. His face drained of color. The notary glanced between us nervously. Claire gasped. Mom, what are you talking about? That was the beginning of the war. Because I had already suspected David long before that night at the restaurant. His questions about the property taxes, the insurance, the size of the house, they weren't innocent. They were reconnaissance. And after Robert's death, I'd grown more protective, more suspicious of anyone who tried to step too close to what we'd built. So I started keeping records, notes in a leather-bound journal, copies of deeds, bank statements, wills, all neatly organized in my safe. And a week before the wedding, something had pushed me over the edge. David had come by to help fix the sink, and I'd caught him in my study, standing in front of my safe with a strange look on his face. When he saw me, he smiled. Just admiring your bookshelves, Margaret. But I knew better. That night I called my lawyer, Edward, a friend of Robert's. He'd handled our estate for years. Edward, I told him, I have a bad feeling about David. Margaret, he said, keep your documents safe. If he tries anything, we'll be ready. So when David arrived with his notary, I wasn't blindsided. I had evidence, I had protection, and I had the strength of a woman who had already lost everything once and refused to lose again. Still, Claire was blind. She clutched his arm, her face pale. Mom, why would you say that? David's just trying to help us. I looked straight into her eyes. No, Claire. He's trying to help himself. David laughed, but it sounded forced. Margaret, you're imagining things. Let's not make this more dramatic than it needs to be. I didn't answer. I just closed the door in his face. Behind the safety of the wood, I leaned against it, my heart pounding. I was 65, yes. My body ached, my hair had grayed. My hands bore the lines of a life lived. But I was not weak. And I was not about to be bullied out of my own home. Over the next week, the tension grew. David became more insistent, more manipulative. He told Claire I was being selfish, that I didn't care about her happiness. He left brochures for retirement homes on my kitchen table. He even brought a real estate friend over while I was out shopping. Thankfully, my neighbor Seal noticed and called me immediately. And each time I wrote it all down. Every word, every visit, every attempt. My journal became my shield. Because this wasn't just about a house. This was about dignity, about love, about a lifetime of memories that one greedy man thought he could steal. And he had no idea just how prepared I was to fight back. David didn't take my rejection well. In fact, he doubled down. The very next morning, I caught him in my garden, trimming roses with my late husband's shears. He smiled as though nothing had happened the night before. Morning, Margaret. Just helping around. You know, these roses could use more care. I stood on the porch, arms crossed. Put the shears back in the shed. He froze, the smile cracking for just a second. Then, with that same false charm, he obeyed. But his eyes, those cold, calculating eyes, never left me. That's when I knew. David wasn't going to give up easily. Claire, poor Claire, was caught in the middle. She came over later that day, wringing her hands. Mom, please. David's just worried about the future. He wants us to have stability. Stability. Scoff. Claire, he's circling like a vulture. You've known him for less than a year. Do you really think he cares more about stability than about your inheritance? She flinched at the word. Inheritance. She hated when I brought it up. Hated the implication that Robert and I had left her something valuable that David might exploit. Mom, you're being unfair, she whispered. He loves me. I reached for her hand. Honey, I know you want to believe that. But love doesn't look like this. Love doesn't try to evict your mother 2 days after the wedding. Her eyes shimmered with unshed tears. She pulled away. You don't understand him. And then she left. I stood in the silence of my house, the tick of the grandfather clock echoing against the walls Robert had painted himself. My daughter had chosen him over me, at least for now, and that hurt more than I could say. But hurt wouldn't stop me. Over the next few weeks, David's games escalated. He called city inspectors to my house, claiming there were safety hazards that made it unfit for me to live alone. He tried to charm my neighbors, spinning stories about how I was senile and needed supervision. One afternoon, I even found a moving truck parked outside, empty but ready, as if he thought he could intimidate me into leaving. I wrote it all down. Dates, times, witnesses. My journal grew thick with his crimes. Then came the night that changed everything. I was making tea when I heard a noise in my study. My heart sank. I knew that sound, the faint scrape of metal against metal. I walked in quietly and froze. David, kneeling in front of my safe. He had a crowbar in one hand, sweat glistening on his forehead. When he saw me, his face twisted into something feral. You shouldn't have seen this, Margaret, he hissed. My knees wobbled, but I stood tall. That safe contains my husband's legacy, and you will never touch it. He stepped closer, crowbar in hand. For the first time I felt real fear, not just for my home but for my life. But just then, headlights flashed through the window. My neighbor Seal, bless her, had arrived to drop off some soup. David stumbled back, muttered something about fixing the lock, and left in a hurry. That was the moment I decided. Enough was enough. The next morning I took my journal, the photographs of David lurking around my house, the receipts for the notary visit, and the report of him breaking into my study, and I went straight to Edward, my lawyer. He listened carefully, flipping through the pages. His brow furrowed deeper with every detail. Margaret, he said finally, this is enough to build a case. Fraud, harassment, attempted coercion. If he tries to push again, we'll take him to court. Not if, I corrected softly. When? Because David was nothing if not predictable. Sure enough, 3 days later he returned. Not with charm this time. Not even with pretense. He barged in, papers in hand, Claire trailing behind him with red-rimmed eyes. Sign them, he demanded. Transfer the deed, Margaret. You don't belong here anymore. Claire's voice was trembling. Mom, please, maybe it's for the best. That cut deeper than any crowbar. My own daughter, begging me to hand over the life Robert and I had built. But I stood my ground. I walked slowly to the mantel, where Robert's photo rested. I touched the frame gently, then turned to face them. No, I said firmly. This house is mine, and if you think you can bully me, you're about to learn a very hard lesson. David sneered. And what lesson is that? That's when I pulled out the folder Edward had prepared. I dropped it on the table between us. Police reports, photos, copies of my journal entries, legal affidavits. This, I said, my voice steady, is everything the police need to investigate you for fraud and attempted theft. The moment you step 1 foot closer to this house again, I'll hand it all over. For once, David's mask slipped completely. His face twisted with rage. You old witch, he spat. You think you can scare me? I didn't flinch. I don't need to scare you, David. The law will do that for me. Claire gasped, tears spilling down her cheeks. She looked at him, really looked at him, as though seeing the truth for the first time. David, is it true? Did you? He didn't answer. He just stormed out, slamming the door so hard the windows rattled. Claire collapsed onto the sofa, sobbing. I held her, my own tears finally falling. Not because of David, but because of the daughter I almost lost to his lies. It took weeks, but slowly, Claire began to see him for who he was. She moved back in with me after their marriage crumbled. The divorce was messy, but thanks to Edward and the evidence I'd collected, David walked away with nothing. Not my house, not Claire's savings, not even his fake reputation as a charming husband. He disappeared from our lives, and good riddance. And me. I stayed in my house. My roses bloomed again that spring. My kitchen smelled of fresh bread and coffee. My walls, my memories, my dignity, they were all still mine. Because sometimes people mistake age for weakness. But I proved, once and for all, that a 65-year-old widow can still fight and win. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of the story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.